Thanks, Neil. We were very pleased at the way DEFRA responded to our call for an independent scientific review of the mass shellfish mortality, which ruled out the two existing theories, but there's still, as Geraint will ask, still quite a lot of consternation on the Yorkshire coast as to where we go from here. Geraint.
Yes. And on that, obviously the conclusion on the balanced probabilities of that committee, many of whom were, of course, working for DEFRA and indeed for the ports, was that there was in fact some sort of unique pathogen that affected crabs and other crustaceans that had been responsible for this sort of mass killing. Have you identified this pathogen?
No.
And my understanding is that you rejected calls for further investigation to identify it. Is that correct?
Well, as I replied to AFRA questions on 7th February, but the key thing is that one of the things that the panel did conclude significantly and ruled out issues to do with the pyridine, but it was a novel pathogen. By that stage, it was felt like trying to find the Holy Grail on what it could be. And what we did, I made the judgment that we wouldn't try and pursue any further research. However, we did say that we would respond to reports of similar mortality events, and CFAS has not received any reports of similar mortality events since the original 2021 incident.
Because the verdict was a probabilistic one, wasn't it? So that they viewed on the balanced probabilities, they didn't think it was pyridine, although there are people...
But they highly concluded it, and in effect, when interviewed, the
99%
panel
degree
ruled
of
it out.
certainty on that one.
Yeah.
99.
It was 99% degree of certainty they ruled out capital dredging. So I read the report.
Right, so this, so we do know, don't we, that in other sites around the country, for the something like 10 free ports, many of these sites have got a history of major industrial work with chemicals like pyridine, which are known to be toxic to crabs there. So, I mean, what further work is... My understanding is that there's no attempt now to test for pyridine and other toxic chemicals for dredging materials that are being dumped back into the sea in Tyne-Tees, and there's no plan to test for them in other free ports. Is that correct?
I mean, the testing regime will be, I assume, undertaken by MMO, but to give you an example, in this where Stuffield may be interested, we have received some reports. There was mortality in landed whelks reported to CFAS at some point in 2022, but the samples received by CFAS arrived frozen, which limited any investigation possible. And after the decline in late 2022, my understanding is that landings have started to return to typical levels. And I know in other parts of the northeast there's been drops in catches of prawns, but overall in that area, the review has indicated that there hasn't been particularly a change in that regard. So, there's no obvious particular things to get into, but as I said at the time, if there are reports of similar crab crustacean mortality events as was experienced in that 2021 incident, CFAS will be involved pretty much straight away in trying to determine it.
So don't you think there's a case, given the level of crab mortality and other crustaceans, that there's a case, a sort of precautionary principle case, that we should be doing testing of the seabed where we're going to do major dredging next to prospective new free ports to test in advance whether crabs might be affected, rather than after the event saying, oh no, there's another few million crabs dead, we must have another look, and it might not be this phantom pathogen we refuse to look for.
Because some of the changes that have happened in parts of the northeast, CFAS have actually undertaken sampling and are testing for disease or pathogens in that, particularly thinking of the Nethrops area, so the Norway lobster and the Dublin Bay prawns. So that work is underway.
Right. And then in terms of you'll be aware that and we had testimony, very saddening testimony from fishermen and women who'd had multiple generations of fishing in their family, and now because of the devastation of the crab stocks, and as you know, crabs and lobsters take 5 or 6 years to mature, they're going to have to sell up their boats, and that's the end of their living forever. So why is it that you haven't called for the government to provide them some level of compensation, even if this is an act of God, as it were, akin to what happened with the foot and mouth disease episode where farmers were compensated? Are you treating fishermen differently to other people who've had their lives ruined?
In terms of foot and mouth, the government required, as it does on aspects of avian influenza, to kill the animals that were healthy, and compensation was paid for that. In this regard, I understand the concerns of the local fishermen, but in that wider area, what has been fed back is that we're not seeing a particular change in aspects of revenues. We also have certain funds available, Seafood Fund. I met 2 of the local MPs just recently talking about how there might be access to some of that funding to help in terms of reinvestment in kit or other facilities that may be possible in order to help the fishermen in that area.
Because the problem here is that in the event that you were correct, namely that this was a sort of a novel pathogen, as it's called, a sudden sort of a virus of crabs and the like, that's basically killed the crab population. What confidence can the local community have that they can sort of over time rebuild that, or what confidence have you that that pathogen might not suddenly spread from the Tyne Tees, where it seems to be uniquely of infecting things, to go around the whole coast, destroying our entire crab and lobster stock? And if that is a possibility, why aren't you testing for it? It seems completely irresponsible.
I don't think it is irresponsible. I've already reported to the committee that CFAS hasn't received any reports of similar crab or crustacean mortality events since that original incident, and I've already indicated to said to the committee one of the sudden changes in terms of drop-in catch of prawns, Dublin Bay prawns and Norway lobster, means CFAS have undertaken some sampling and are testing for disease and pathogens. So I actually think we're being proactive.
I'm not quite with this, in the sense that this pathogen allegedly suddenly emerged, killed all these crabs, so then it sort of disappeared, and we haven't found it, and so it could just happen again anywhere, couldn't it? It seems a farcical explanation to me, I've got to say, but assuming that is the explanation, that implies that could just spontaneously happen again, and we don't know what we're looking for, and we're not even looking for what we're looking for.
We do know what we're looking for in terms of...
we're not looking, are we?
We do know what we're looking for in terms of the similar crab and crustacean mortality events. None have been reported.
And finally, shifting the subject slightly, just briefly, you obviously used to be the health secretary, and you probably know that treating somebody who's poorly nourished